The dust swirled around Novak's worn boots as she stood alone on the wooden platform, watching the train disappear into the golden horizon of the Dakota Territory, carrying with it her last 50 cents and the carpet bag that held everything she owned in this world. September 1882 had brought her to White River, South Dakota, with promises of a teaching position that turned out to be nothing more than a cruel hoax. And now, as the sun began its descent toward the endless prairie, she realized she had nowhere to go and no way to get there. The station master had already locked up for the evening, indifferent to her plight, and the few scattered buildings that made up the town looked as unwelcoming as the vast emptiness beyond. Georgia pressed her hand against her empty stomach, trying to remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. 2 days, maybe 3. The journey from Ohio had drained her savings, and the disappointment of arriving to find no school, no job, and no one expecting her had drained something far more precious: her hope. She sat down on the hard bench, fighting back tears that would do her no good. At 22 years old, she had left behind a crowded boarding house in Cincinnati, an ailing aunt who could no longer afford to keep her, and dreams of making something of herself out west, where women were said to have more opportunities. Instead, she found herself more alone than she had ever been, watching the sky turn purple and orange as evening settled over the prairie like a blanket she could not share. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A man rode toward the station on a bay horse, his silhouette dark against the fading light. He dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the platform. Georgia straightened her spine, trying to look less desperate than she felt. "Station is closed," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. The cowboy pushed back his hat, revealing a weathered face that might have been 30 years old or 40, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. "I can see that. I am looking for a package that was supposed to arrive on the 5:15. "The train came and went," Georgia said. "The station master left right after." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her city dress now dusty from travel, the way she clutched her shawl despite the lingering warmth of the September evening, the unmistakable look of someone with nowhere to go. "You waiting for someone?" "No." The word came out more honestly than she intended. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" Georgia lifted her chin. "I will manage." The cowboy leaned against the post, crossing his arms. "White River does not have a hotel. We have got a boarding house, but Mrs. Fletcher does not take in women without references or coin. The nearest town with proper lodging is 30 miles south. Then I suppose I will sleep here on this bench." She tried to sound matter-of-fact, but her voice wavered. He looked at her for another long moment, something shifting in his expression. "That would not be safe. We have had drifters coming through and not the friendly kind. What is your name?" "Georgia Novak." "Zachary Ashford. I have got a ranch about 5 miles west of here. You can come home with me." The words hung in the air between them, and Georgia felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Every warning her aunt had ever given her about trusting strangers echoed in her mind. But so did the growing darkness and the very real danger of spending the night alone in an unfamiliar place. She looked into Zachary Ashford's face, searching for deception or ill intent, and found only a quiet sincerity that reminded her of her father before the war took him. "I do not know you," she said carefully. "No, you do not. But I am the foreman of the Double Ranch. I've got a housekeeper named Marjorie who is older than the hills and meaner than a rattlesnake, and I give you my word that you will be safe under my roof. Tomorrow, we can figure out what brought you to White River and where you need to go." Georgia considered her options, which were few and grim. She could refuse and likely face worse dangers than what a lone cowboy might present, or she could take a chance on the unexpected kindness in his storm-gray eyes. "Why would you help me?" Zachary pushed away from the post, adjusting his hat. "Because someone helped my sister once when she needed it. She was not much younger than you, stranded in a strange town after our parents died. A family took her in, made sure she got safely to our uncle in Montana. I figure I owe the world that kindness back." Something in his voice told Georgia he was telling the truth. She stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "I would be grateful for a safe place to sleep tonight, Mr. Ashford. Just Zachary, can you ride? I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I can ride." He nodded and whistled. A moment later, a second horse appeared from behind the station building, a gray mare with gentle eyes. "This is Dove. She belongs to Marjorie, but she will not mind the loan." Zachary helped Georgia onto the mare with a steady hand, and she noticed the calluses on his palms, the strength in his grip that was carefully controlled. He mounted his own horse, and they set off across the prairie as the first stars began to appear overhead. The air smelled of sage and dust, so different from the coal smoke and river water of Cincinnati. The vast openness both terrified and exhilarated Georgia. She had never seen so much sky. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves and the whisper of wind through the grass. Finally, Zachary spoke. "What brought you to White River, if you do not mind my asking?" Georgia explained about the letter she had received, promising a position teaching at the new school, how she had sold everything she had to make the journey west. "When I arrived, the station master laughed at me. He said there is no school, no plans for a school. Someone played a cruel joke, or perhaps it was a scheme to rob foolish women. My bag was stolen while I was trying to get answers in town. That is a low thing to do to someone." Zachary's voice was hard. "Did you see who took your bag? 2 men. They were gone before I could even shout. I am sorry that happened to you. White River is small, but it attracts some rough characters passing through to the mining camps up north." "Do you know everyone in town?" Georgia asked. "Most folks. It is that kind of place." "I will ask around tomorrow, but I would not hold out hope for recovering your belongings. Thieves move fast out here." The ranch appeared as a cluster of dark shapes against the horizon, growing more distinct as they approached. Georgia could make out a main house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved like shadows. Lamplight glowed in the windows of the house, warm and welcoming. A dog barked as they rode into the yard and the front door opened. "Zachary Ashford, where have you been?" "Supper is cold and I am not reheating it," called a woman's voice, sharp as broken glass. "I brought a guest, Marjorie. Miss Georgia Novak. She is in need of help." Zachary dismounted and came to help Georgia down. Her legs were unsteady after the ride and she swayed slightly. His hand steadied her, warm through the thin fabric of her sleeves. Marjorie stood on the porch, a thin woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked Georgia up and down with shrewd eyes. "She is half-starved. Get her inside. I will warm up the stew." The inside of the ranch house surprised Georgia with its tidiness and comfort. The main room had a large fireplace, furniture that looked handmade but solid, and curtains at the windows. It felt like a home, not just a place where men slept between long days of work. "Sit down before you fall down," Marjorie ordered, pointing to the table. "Zachary, get her some water." Georgia sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Zachary brought her a cup of cool water and she drank it gratefully. Marjorie set a bowl of beef stew in front of her, along with thick slices of bread and butter. The smell alone nearly made Georgia weep. "Thank you," she whispered. "Eat first, talk later," Marjorie said, but her voice had softened slightly. Georgia ate slowly, trying not to appear too desperate, but she was hungrier than she had realized. The stew was rich and hearty, the bread fresh. She could feel strength returning to her body with each bite. Zachary sat across from her, eating his own supper. "The double has been in my family for 8 years now. My father started it before he died. It is not the biggest spread, but we run about 200 head of cattle and supply horses to the army fort up at Pierre. Right now, it is just me, Marjorie, and 4 ranch hands who bunk in the building out back." "Your sister is in Montana?" Georgia asked, remembering what he had said at the station. "Yes, she married a blacksmith up there. Good man. They have got 2 little ones now." Something wistful crossed his face. "I have not seen them in over a year. That must be hard. Ranch does not run itself." He set down his spoon. "Marjorie will set you up in the spare room. It was meant for my mother, but she never made it out here. You can stay as long as you need while you figure out your next step." "I cannot impose on your kindness without contributing," Georgia said. "I could help around the house, or teach your ranch hands to read if any of them want to learn." Marjorie snorted. "Those cowboys are too stubborn to learn anything that does not involve a horse or a rope. But I would not say no to help with the cooking and cleaning. This place is too much for one woman, though I would never admit it to Zachary." "I just heard you admit it," Zachary said, but he was smiling. "Then I will help," Georgia said. "It is the least I can do." That night, Georgia lay in a real bed for the first time in a week, clean sheets against her skin, and the sound of the prairie wind outside the window. She should have been frightened, alone on a ranch with strangers in a territory she did not know. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. There was something about Zachary Ashford's quiet competence, the way he had helped her without asking for anything in return, that made her want to trust him. As she drifted toward sleep, she wondered what tomorrow would bring. The next morning, Georgia woke to the sound of roosters and the low of cattle. Sunlight streamed through the window, bright and clean. She dressed in the same clothes she had worn the day before, her only clothes now, and made her way to the kitchen. Marjorie was already up, kneading bread dough with strong, capable hands. "There is coffee on the stove," Marjorie said without looking up. "Zachary has been up since before dawn. That man works harder than any 3 men I know." Georgia poured herself coffee and sat at the table. "How long have you worked for him?" "Since his father died 5 years ago. I knew the family back in Kansas before they came out here. Zachary was just a boy then, but even then you could see he was going to be something special, responsible, kind, too kind sometimes. He takes on everyone's burdens." Marjorie shaped the dough into loaves. "His father wanted to build something out here, leave a legacy. Then he got kicked by a horse and died 3 days later. Zachary was 23 years old, and suddenly he had a ranch to run and a teenage sister to care for. He never complained, just did what needed doing. He must have been very strong, still is, but strength only carries you so far when you are alone." Marjorie gave Georgia a pointed look. "He needs someone to share the load with, but he is too busy working to go courting." Georgia felt her cheeks warm. "I am sure he will find someone when the time is right." "Maybe he already has," Marjorie said cryptically and went back to her bread. After breakfast, Georgia insisted on helping with the washing. Marjorie showed her where everything was kept, and soon they had a rhythm going. As they worked, Marjorie talked about the ranch, about the land and the weather and the challenges of making a life in Dakota Territory. Georgia found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple domestic work that had purpose and meaning. Around midday, Zachary came in from the range, dusty and tired. He washed up at the pump outside, and Georgia found herself watching through the window as he splashed water over his face and neck, his shirt clinging to his shoulders. She looked away quickly when he glanced toward the house. At dinner, Zachary reported that he had asked around town about Georgia's stolen bag but had learned nothing useful. "I am sorry. Those men are probably halfway to Wyoming by now." "I expected as much," Georgia said, trying to hide her disappointment. Everything she had brought from her old life was in that bag. Her mother's locket, the few photographs she owned, her teaching certificate. "I have been thinking," Zachary said. "White River might not have a school, but there are families scattered around who would pay for their children to have lessons. You could teach here at the ranch, and I could spread the word. Would not be much money at first, but it is something." Hope flickered in George's chest. "You would do that. You are a teacher. Seems a shame to waste that. But I have no supplies, no books. The general store in town can order things. I will stake you the money to get started, and you can pay me back once you have students." Georgia felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Zachary looked uncomfortable. "I told you. Someone helped my sister once." But Marjorie, listening from the kitchen, smiled to herself as if she knew better. The days fell into a pattern. Georgia helped Marjorie with the housework in the mornings, and in the afternoons, she began preparing lessons, planning a curriculum for children of various ages. Zachary was true to his word, and soon 3 families had committed to sending their children for lessons 3 times a week. It was not much, but it was a start. As September turned to October, Georgia found herself settling into life at the Double A Ranch in ways she had not anticipated. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and the bone-deep exhaustion of physical work. She learned the names of the 4 ranch hands: Pete, a grizzled man in his 50s who had been with Zachary's father from the beginning; Tom and James, brothers from Missouri who were saving money to start their own place; and young Billy, barely 18, who blushed furiously whenever Georgia spoke to him. She also learned about Zachary, though he was not a man who talked much about himself. She learned that he was 28 years old, that he had fought in the final years of the Indian Wars as a scout, and that he carried guilt about things he had seen and done. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed, and that he loved this land with a fierce devotion that was almost spiritual. She learned that he checked on his horses personally every night before bed, that he always made sure his men were paid fairly, and that he had once ridden 40 miles through a snowstorm to fetch a doctor for a neighbor's sick child. Most of all, she learned that, when he looked at her across the dinner table, something warm and complicated stirred in her chest. It was Marjorie who finally said something. They were in the kitchen one evening in late October, preparing supper while Zachary was still out with the herd. The older woman had been watching Georgia with knowing eyes for days. "You are falling in love with him," Marjorie said bluntly. Georgia nearly dropped the knife she was using to cut vegetables. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do. And he is falling in love with you too, though he is too stubborn to admit it. We barely know each other. You have been living under the same roof for 6 weeks. You know each other better than most couples do when they marry." Marjorie stirred the pot on the stove. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. He took me in because I needed help, not because he wanted complications." "You are not a complication, girl. You are the best thing that has happened to this ranch since I got here. The house feels like a home now." And Zachary smiles more than I have seen in 5 years. Georgia's heart was racing. "Even if what you say is true, I cannot assume his feelings. It would not be proper." "Proper," Marjorie snorted. "This is Dakota Territory, not a Boston drawing room. Out here, when 2 people find something good, they hold on to it. Life is too hard and too short for games." That night at dinner, Georgia could barely meet Zachary's eyes. Every time she looked at him, Marjorie's words echoed in her head. She noticed things she had tried not to notice before. The way his hands moved when he talked about the horses, the gentleness in his voice when he asked about her day, the way he always made sure she had the best piece of meat or the freshest bread. After the meal, Zachary asked if she would like to see the new foals in the barn. Her heart hammered as she agreed. The barn was warm and dim, smelling of hay and horses. Zachary led her to a stall where a mare stood with two gangly-legged foals. They were beautiful, all soft eyes and curious noses. They were born 3 weeks ago, Zachary said. Twins are rare. I was not sure both would make it, but they are strong. Georgia reached out to touch one of the foals and it nuzzled her hand. She laughed, delighted. When she looked up, Zachary was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Georgia, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "When I found you at that station, I thought I was just helping someone in need." That was true, but it is not the whole truth anymore. He paused, searching for words. "These past weeks, having you here, it has been different, better. I look forward to coming home in a way I never did before. I find myself thinking about you when I am out on the range, wondering if you are safe, if you are happy." Georgia's throat was tight. "Zachary, let me finish. I know I do not have the right to ask you for anything. You are educated, refined. You could go to San Francisco or Denver and make a real life for yourself. But if you wanted to stay, if you could see yourself building a life here, I would be honored to court you properly. I would do everything I could to make you happy." The barn seemed very quiet except for the soft sounds of the horses. Georgia stepped closer to him, her heart in her throat. "You think I am too good for you. I know you are. Then you are a fool, Zachary Ashford." Her voice trembled. "I have never met a better man. You are kind and honorable and hardworking. You took me in when I had nothing, asked for nothing in return, and gave me a chance to build something of my own. How could I possibly think I am too good for you?" Hope flickered in his eyes. "Does that mean, yes, I would very much like you to court me?" The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. "I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right." "Please do," Georgia whispered. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative, then with growing confidence as she responded. Georgia had been kissed before, clumsy stolen moments with boys back in Ohio, but this was different. This was a man who knew his own mind, who kissed her like she was precious and vital. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Zachary admitted. "I was hoping you would." He laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. Then he took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We should probably get back to the house before Marjorie sends out a search party." But they stood there for a few more minutes, just holding hands in the warm darkness of the barn, listening to the horses and the wind, both of them smiling like fools. The next weeks were the happiest of Georgia's life. Zachary courted her with a seriousness that was both touching and amusing. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, taught her to ride better so they could explore the land together, and sat with her in the evenings while she worked on lessons for her students. The ranch hands teased him mercilessly, but he took it good-naturedly. Georgia's school was growing. By November, she had 7 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, and their parents spoke highly of her teaching. She held classes in the large front room of the ranch house 3 times a week, and the sound of children's voices made the place feel even more alive. One cold November afternoon, Zachary took Georgia to a spot on the ranch he said was special. They rode for about an hour, up into the rolling hills where the grass gave way to scrub pine. At the top of a rise, he helped her dismount and pointed to the view. "This is the highest point on the AA," he said. "You can see for 20 miles in every direction." The land spread out below them like a rumpled quilt, browns and golds under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Georgia could see the ranch buildings in the distance, the ribbon of the river, the vast sweep of the prairie. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "My father brought me here the day we arrived in Dakota Territory. He said this would all be ours one day, that we would build something that would last. I come here when I need to think, when I need to remember why I work so hard." He turned to her. "I wanted you to see it because you are part of this now, part of what I am building." "Zachary," he took both her hands in his, "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards. But there is nothing conventional about us or our situation. I love you, Georgia Novak. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you laugh when the foals try to steal apples from your pockets. I love how you have made my house into a home, how you sing while you work, how you light up when you talk about your students. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to build a life with you here on this land. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Will you marry me?" Georgia felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart racing against her chest. Then he was kissing her, deep and thorough, and she was kissing him back with all the love and hope that filled her to bursting. They were married 3 weeks later in White River's small church. The whole town turned out, curious to see the stranded woman and the rancher who had taken her in. Marjorie cried through the entire ceremony, though she denied it afterward. Georgia wore a dress that Marjorie and the ranch hands had pooled their money to buy from the dressmaker in Pierre, pale blue wool that fit her perfectly. Zachary wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Georgia's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. When Zachary slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, Georgia felt the last piece of herself that had been lost and frightened click into place. She was home. The ranch hands threw them a celebration dinner at the main house, with food and music and dancing that lasted until late into the night. Pete played the fiddle with surprising skill, and Tom and James sang songs that made everyone laugh. Even Billy forgot his shyness and danced with Marjorie, who blushed like a girl. When it was finally time for everyone to leave, Zachary carried Georgia over the threshold of their bedroom in the way of tradition. He set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. "Are you happy, Mrs. Ashford?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," she answered honestly. That night they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with tenderness and patience. Zachary was gentle with her innocence, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Georgia marveled at how her life had changed. 4 months ago, she had been alone and desperate at a train station. Now she was loved and cherished, building a life with a man who made her feel like the most important person in the world. The first winter of their marriage tested them both. December brought fierce storms that blanketed the prairie in snow and drove the temperature so low that water froze in its bucket. Zachary and his men worked brutal hours trying to keep the cattle safe, to make sure none wandered off and froze. Georgia spent her days helping Marjorie keep the house warm, cooking enormous meals to fuel the men, and worrying every time Zachary rode out into the blizzard. One particularly bad storm kept Zachary out all night. Georgia stood at the window watching the snow fall in sheets, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. When he finally came home at dawn, half frozen and exhausted, she burst into tears of relief. "I am all right," he murmured, holding her close despite his freezing clothes. "I am all right, sweetheart. I will always come home to you." But the storm had taken its toll. They lost 15 head of cattle, frozen or lost in the drifts. It was a financial blow that would hurt the ranch, and Zachary blamed himself even though everyone told him he had done everything possible. Georgia found him in the barn a few nights later, sitting alone in the dark. She sat down beside him, taking his hand. "Talk to me. I should have moved them to the south pasture sooner. I should have seen that storm coming. You are not a god, Zachary. You cannot control the weather. But I can control my decisions, and I made the wrong one. Those cattle were going to be our nest egg, the money to expand the herd next year." Georgia squeezed his hand. "We will recover. We have each other and we have this land. The rest we can rebuild." He looked at her, his eyes haunted. "What if I cannot give you the life you deserve? What if I fail you the way I failed those cattle? You could never fail me." She cupped his face in her hands. "Do you hear me? You are the best man I know. We will face whatever comes together and we will get through it. That is what marriage means." Slowly, the tension left his shoulders. He pulled her into his lap, burying his face against her neck. "I do not deserve you. Lucky for you, I disagree." They sat there in the dark barn for a long time, holding each other, drawing strength from each other. When they finally went back to the house, Zachary's step was lighter. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in reluctant patches. As the land greened, so did Georgia's hope. She had been feeling strange for weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings, and when she finally allowed herself to acknowledge what it might mean, joy flooded through her. She told Zachary one evening after dinner. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Zachary just stared at her. Then his face transformed, wonder and joy and love all mixed together. "Truly, truly. I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come in September." Zachary let out a whoop of joy that brought Marjorie running from the kitchen. When they told her the news, the older woman actually hugged them both, her eyes suspiciously bright. "About time," she said gruffly. "This place needs the sound of children." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Georgia continued teaching through the spring, though she had to let out her dresses as her belly grew. Zachary became even more protective, constantly worried that she was doing too much. She found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I just want you and the baby to be safe," he said. "We are safe. Now let me do my work." But she loved him for caring, for the way his eyes lit up every time he felt the baby kick, for how he talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. In August, Zachary rode to Pierre and returned with a cradle he had commissioned from a furniture maker. It was beautiful, carved from oak with a rocking base. He set it up in their bedroom, and Georgia traced the smooth wood with her fingers, imagining their child sleeping there. "You are going to be an amazing father," she told him. "I hope so. I am scared I will do it wrong." "You will be perfect. I have seen how you are with the animals, how patient and gentle. You will be the same with our baby." Their son was born on a warm September evening in 1883, almost exactly a year after Georgia had arrived at the White River Station. The labor was long and difficult, with only Marjorie and a midwife from town to help. Zachary paced outside the bedroom door, his face white with fear every time Georgia cried out. But when the baby finally arrived, healthy and wailing, and Marjorie brought him to meet his father, Zachary wept openly. "A son," he whispered, taking the tiny bundle with shaking hands. "We have a son." They named him Zachary Ashford, Aaron after Zachary's father. Little Zach, as they called him, had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was perfect. The first months with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming and completely wonderful. Georgia had to put her teaching on hold, but she did not mind. She loved every moment with her son, even the difficult ones. Zachary was a devoted father, coming in from the range at odd hours just to hold his boy, singing to him in the middle of the night when he would not sleep. As Zach grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch prospered. The cattle herd grew, and Zachary's horses gained a reputation for quality throughout the territory. They added on to the house, giving Zach his own room and building a proper schoolroom for Georgia to eventually resume teaching. Georgia did start teaching again when Zach was 2, balancing her duties as a mother and teacher and ranch wife with a grace that amazed everyone, including herself. In the spring of 1886, their second child was born, a daughter they named Grace Marie. She had Zachary's blonde hair and Georgia's brown eyes, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the first moment he held her. Watching Zachary with their children, seeing the tenderness and love he showed them, Georgia fell in love with him all over again. Life on the double was not always easy. There were droughts that parched the land, hard winters that tested their endurance, cattle rustlers that had to be dealt with, and accidents that left men hurt or worse. But through it all, Georgia and Zachary faced everything together. Their love deepened with each challenge overcome, each joy shared. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Georgia back to the high point on the ranch where he had proposed. The children stayed with Marjorie, and it was just the 2 of them under the vast Dakota sky. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked. "Staying here instead of going to a city, having an easier life." Georgia looked out at the land that had become home, at the ranch buildings in the distance where her children were probably driving Marjorie to distraction. She thought about the school she ran now for 12 students, about the community they had built, about the life she and Zachary had created together from nothing. "Never," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I am meant to be. With you." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I thank God every day that you were at that station, that I found you. We found each other," Georgia corrected. "You saved me that day, but I think maybe I saved you too. We saved each other." "Yes," Zachary agreed. "We did." They stood there together as the sun set over the prairie. 2 people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built a love and a life that would endure. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of all the years still to come, all the moments they would share, all the love that would continue to grow. Young Zach would grow up to take over the ranch one day, a fine man who inherited his father's integrity and his mother's intelligence. Grace would become a teacher like her mother, opening a school of her own in Pierre. There would be other children too, 2 more sons who would fill the ranch with noise and laughter and life. But that was all still in the future. For now, there was just Georgia and Zachary on their hilltop, holding hands as the stars began to appear overhead, grateful beyond words for the twist of fate that had brought a stranded woman and a cowboy together at a lonely train station one September evening, and for the courage they had both shown in taking a chance on something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. Their story was not the stuff of dime novels or grand adventures. It was simpler and more profound. 2 people who had been lost finding home in each other, building something beautiful and lasting through hard work, devotion, and love. In the end, It was exactly the story both of them had always needed to write, even before they knew they were looking for it. The double-A ranch would flourish for generations, but its true legacy was not measured in cattle or acres or profits. It was measured in the love that had been its foundation, in the family that had grown there, in the lives that had been built on the simple act of one man seeing someone in need and saying 5 words that changed everything. "You can come home with me." And she had come home, not just to a place but to a person, to a life richer and fuller than anything she could have imagined when she stood alone on that platform with nowhere left to go. The cowboy had found her at her lowest moment and offered her not just shelter but hope. And from that hope had grown a love story that would echo through the years, a testament to the power of kindness and the unexpected places where we find our destiny. As darkness settled over the Dakota Prairie that anniversary evening, Georgia and Zachary made their way back down the hill toward the ranch house where lamplight glowed in the windows and their children waited. They rode side by side, comfortable in the silence that comes from knowing each other completely. When the house came into view, they could see small faces pressed against the glass, watching for their return. "They missed us," Georgia said with a smile. "We have only been gone an hour." "That is an hour too long when you are 4 and 2, Zachary laughed. "You are right. Let us get home to them." Home. The word settled warm in Georgia's chest. She had a home, a real home, for the first time since her parents died. She had a husband who loved her, children who needed her, work that fulfilled her, and land that stretched to the horizon. It was everything she had never dared to hope for. As they approached the house, the door flew open and Zach came running out, Grace toddling behind him with Marjorie following to make sure she did not fall. "Mama, Papa, you are home." Zachary dismounted and scooped up both children, one in each arm, making them squeal with delight. Georgia watched them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was her family, this was her life, and it was more than good, it was perfect. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and Marjorie had retired to her own cabin, Georgia and Zachary sat together on their porch swing, wrapped in a quilt against the cool spring air. The stars blazed overhead in a way they never had back east, so many and so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About that first night when you brought me here. I was so frightened and so desperate. I thought my life was over. And now I know it was just beginning." She turned to look at him. "You gave me everything, Zachary. A home, a family, purpose, love. How can I ever thank you enough? You thank me every day just by being here, by loving me, by building this life with me." He kissed her softly. "I am the one who should be grateful. You took a chance on a stranger, on a hard life in a wild place. You could have said no. I could never have said no. Something in me knew even then that you were my future." "Fate," Zachary said. "Love," Georgia corrected. "Or maybe both." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. A coyote called in the distance and somewhere an owl hooted. Inside the house, one of the children cried out in sleep and then settled. These were the sounds of home. The years would continue to pass, bringing challenges and triumphs in equal measure. There would be the terrible winter of 1888 that would test their endurance again. There would be the joy of watching their children grow and learn and become their own people. There would be the arrival of 2 more sons, born in 1888 and 1891, who would complete their family. There would be the expansion of Georgia's school into a proper building in town, funded by the ranchers who valued education for their children. There would be Marjorie's peaceful death in her sleep at the age of 73, mourned by all who knew her. There would be visits from Zachary's sister and her family, creating bonds between cousins separated by distance. There would be the territory's advancement to statehood in 1889, and the sense that they were part of something larger than themselves. But through all of it, the constant would be the love between Georgia and Zachary, a love that had started with an act of kindness and grown into something unshakable. They would have disagreements and difficult times, as all couples do, but they would never forget what brought them together or the promises they had made to each other. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Georgia and Zachary would stand together in the same church where they had married, renewing their vows. Both would have white hair and lined faces by then, bodies marked by decades of hard work, but when they looked at each other, they would still see the young woman and the cowboy who had met at a train station and dared to believe in possibility. Zachary would die peacefully in 1935 at the age of 81 with Georgia holding his hand. His last words would be, "I love you. Thank you for coming home with me." Georgia would follow him 2 years later, her heart finally giving out at the age of 77. In the end, she would be laid to rest beside him in the small cemetery outside White River, their graves marked with a simple stone that bore both their names and the dates of their long, full lives together. The Double A Ranch would remain in the family, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to its story, but always remembering the love that had been its beginning. Young Zach's grandson would eventually turn part of it into a heritage site, preserving the original ranch house where so much history had unfolded. Visitors would come to see what life was like in the Old West, but the real story, the love story of Georgia and Zachary, would be the one that captured hearts. But on that night in 1888, sitting on their porch with their whole lives still ahead of them, Georgia and Zachary knew none of what was to come. They knew only the present moment, the warmth of each other's presence, the peace of being exactly where they belonged. "I should check on the horses one more time," Zachary said eventually. "I will come with you." They walked hand in hand to the barn, where the familiar smells and sounds welcomed them. The horses nickered softly, recognizing their voices. Zachary made his rounds, checking each stall while Georgia watched. She never grew tired of seeing him work, of witnessing the care he took with everything he did. When he was satisfied that all was well, they stood together in the doorway, looking out at the prairie bathed in starlight. "Do you remember the night I kissed you for the first time?" Zachary asked. "Right here in this barn, of course I remember. I had been hoping you would kiss me for weeks." "I was terrified. I thought you might slap me," Georgia laughed. "I was terrified you would never kiss me. I thought maybe I had imagined the way you looked at me. I looked at you like you were the answer to every prayer I did not know I was praying." He turned her to face him, his hands on her waist. "I still look at you that way. Zachary Ashford, you are going to make me cry." "Happy tears, I hope. Always happy tears when it comes to you." He kissed her then, deep and tender, a kiss that held years of love and passion and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We should get some sleep," Georgia said. "Zach will be up at dawn demanding breakfast. That boy is always hungry. He is growing. They both are, so fast it scares me sometimes. They will always need us, no matter how big they get." Zachary took her hand again and they walked back to the house together. "Just like I will always need you. And I you." They climbed into bed, fitting together the way they had for years, Georgia's head on Zachary's chest, his arm around her. In the quiet darkness, with the familiar sounds of the ranch around them, they drifted toward sleep. "Georgia." Zachary murmured, Thank you for being stranded at that station." She smiled against his chest. "Thank you for finding me there. I love you." I love you too, always. Sleep claimed them both, two souls perfectly matched, resting in the home they had built together through love and faith and the willingness to take a chance on something unexpected. Outside, the prairie wind sang through the grass, carrying with it the whispers of all the love stories that had unfolded under the wide Dakota sky, but none more enduring than theirs. The cowboy had found her stranded at the station with nowhere left to go, and he had said, "You can come home with me." In those 7 words, in that simple act of compassion, 2 lives had been transformed. From desperation had come hope. From strangers had come soulmates. From an ending had come a beginning that would last a lifetime and beyond. And if you stood on that high point on the Double Ranch even today, if you listened carefully to the wind, you might still hear echoes of their laughter, whispers of their conversations, the eternal resonance of a love that had been built to last not just through the years they were given, but forever in the legacy they left behind. A legacy not of cattle or land or money, but of showing that kindness matters, that love conquers, and that sometimes the best things in life come from simply offering a helping hand to someone who needs it and being brave enough to accept it when it is offered. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love eternal. And it all began with a cowboy and a stranded woman at a lonely train station in Dakota Territory, where destiny wore dusty boots and spoke with quiet compassion, changing 2 lives forever with a simple invitation to come home.